The mystery of the dry moss in the yard, the hidden world. Part 1. The sleeping carpet of life. A stretch of dry moss lay in the corner of the yard. Its color was no longer fresh green. The surface of the moss was dry, but the ground beneath was damp, dark in color. It looked like it had just been drenched by rain, even though the sun had been shining brightly all day. Its entire body, from the very tip to the part that was attached to the ground, absorbed water directly from its surroundings. When rain fell or morning dew came, the moss absorbed the water like a sponge. The entire surface of its very thin leaves, only one layer of cells thick, immediately absorbed the water. The moss expanded, its color turning emerald green. But as the sun rose higher and the air became drier, the water on its surface evaporated. It entered a state of dormancy. Dormancy is a deliberate long sleep. The moss draws all its life fluids into the most vital parts of its cells. Its outer surface is deliberately allowed to dry and shrivel. The cells at the top turn into a shield. The small pores in its body close tightly. Physically, the moss looked dead, but in fact, it was holding its breath, storing energy, waiting for the next rain to come. Part 2. Birth from living dust. Where does that fresh green moss actually come from? In the damp soil beneath the dry moss, we often see fresh green moss emerging. Where does the moss come from? In fact, moss does not originate from the soil. The soil is simply a place where it attaches itself. Spores are the reproductive organs of moss. They are much smaller than a speck of dust. They open and release these spores into the air. The wind carries them in all directions. On the surface of the damp soil, there's a very thin layer of water. The fallen spores absorb the water and then begin to germinate. These spores will grow into protonema. Protonema are branched green threads that spread along the surface of the soil. From these protonema, small shoots emerge. These shoots contain mother cells that will continue to divide and become moss plants. Part 3. Microdomists of the boss world. A creature that lurks near moss roots. Its name is springtail. But what is a springtail doing among moss? Springtails are omnivores or detritivores. They feed on decaying organic matter, microscopic fungi growing on the soil surface, bacteria, and even moss spores. Their small bodies lose water easily, so they rely heavily on high humidity. Part 4. The factory of life on the stem. Under the microscope, amidst the green moss, something can be seen sticking up. The stalk is very small, slender, reddish, or brownish. And at the top, there's a small capsule-like structure called a sporophyte. This sporophyte is born from the fertilization of an egg by sperm at the tip of the female moss stem. So, the sporophyte is actually the child of the green moss. It grows on top of the parent body, taking in water and nutrients through a connecting structure called the sporophyte foot. The upright stalk is called a seta. Its function is to propel the spore capsule as high as possible into the air. Why high? So that when the spores are mature and ready to be released, they can be carried as far as possible by the wind. Part 5. Dew on the microscope. Proof that even dry moss retains water. Microscope preparation by clamping moss between two glass slides. The top cover glass is fogged up. Water vapor sticks to the glass surface, forming small water droplets. Does the moss contain water? The answer is yes. The sample receives heat from the microscope lamp. This heat is enough to raise the temperature in the narrow space between the two slides. Moss cells that previously stored water in vacuoles and between their cell walls begin to release the water in the form of steam is called transpiration. Part 6. Dissecting the meaning of light brown and dark brown in moss rhizoids. Under a microscope, they look like roots. These structures are called rhizoids. Some are light brown, others dark brown. Moss rhizoids function more as anchors. They anchor the moss to the surface of the soil, rocks, or bark to prevent it from being washed away by wind or rain. However, rhizoids can still absorb small amounts of water and nutrients. The difference in color between light and dark brown reflects the natural aging process. Light brown rhizoids are more efficient at absorbing water, while dark brown rhizoids are older and less functional. Part 7. Safe or dangerous? Answering concerns about touching moss with bare hands. Is it dangerous for children to handle yard moss while playing? And what about adults who clean moss without safety gloves? Toxicologically, moss generally doesn't produce toxins that are harmful to humans. However, there are several indirect risks that we should still be aware of. The first is biological risk. Among the moss clumps, bacteria, fungi, and more importantly, parasitic worm eggs can live, possibly from the feces of animals such as cats, birds, or mice. If children play with moss and then eat it or touch their faces without washing their hands, there's a risk of worm eggs or pathogenic bacteria entering their bodies. The second risk is contact with the tiny creatures that inhabit moss. Some species of mites can cause mild allergic reactions in people with very sensitive skin. The third risk is chemical hygiene. If your yard has been sprayed with pesticides, herbicides, or spilled with detergents and other household chemicals, moss can absorb and store residues of these materials on its surface. Prolonged skin contact with these residues can cause irritation, itching, or dry skin. That concludes our discussion. Thank you for being with us. See you again on our next microscopic adventure.